It was a Thursday night, the kind where the rain taps gently on the roof and you think the world is at peace. I was sitting on the couch with Linda, half watching a rerun of Wheel of Fortune, half thinking about how quiet the house had felt since Ethan left for his friend's sleepover. The coffee smelled faintly burnt, but I didn't care. It was just another ordinary night. Until it wasn't. At 9:47 p.m., I heard the knock, heavy, deliberate, like the sound of a hammer on wood. Linda looked at me, her eyes confused. "Who would that be this late?" she whispered. I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and opened the door to a wall of blue and red light. 2 officers stood there, rain dripping off their caps, their faces unreadable. Behind them, a black unmarked sedan idled, engine humming like a threat. "Andrew Fletcher?" One of them asked. "Yes, sir. You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud related to the estate of Walter Fletcher." The words didn't make sense. They floated in the air, disconnected, unreal. Embezzlement. My grandfather's estate? I felt Linda's hand clutch my arm, trembling. "There must be some mistake," I said, my voice cracking. The officer turned me around, cold metal closing around my wrists. The sound of the cuffs, that click, it still echoes in my bones. As they led me down the porch steps, I saw movement through the rain. My father Howard standing by the mailbox. His face was a mask. My brother Matt beside him, holding an umbrella. Not one of them spoke. Not one of them tried to stop it. That's when I understood something I couldn't yet accept. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a setup. And it came from blood. The rain grew heavier, washing over the street, drowning my last breath of freedom. I didn't know it then. But that was the night my family decided I was expendable. The police car smelled like wet leather and disinfectant. I sat there, wrists burning, watching the raindrops slide down the window like tears that refused to fall. I tried to speak, to ask why, but the officer in the passenger seat just said, "Save it for your lawyer." At the station, the air was thick with the sound of typewriters, the buzz of fluorescent lights, and the steady hum of lives being dismantled, one form at a time. They took my fingerprints, my belt, my shoelaces. Each click of the camera felt like a nail being driven into the coffin of who I used to be. Detective Frank Dawson entered the room. Tall, gray hair slicked back, the kind of man who'd seen too many lies to believe in innocence. He tossed a file onto the table. "You stole $200,000 from your grandfather's trust account," he said flatly. I laughed. It wasn't a sane laugh. It was the kind that bursts out when your world collapses under its own weight. "That's insane." "I didn't even have access to that account." He leaned forward, voice low. "Funny thing, Andy. Your signature's all over the withdrawals." He slid a paper toward me. My name scrawled in ink. I stared at it until the letters blurred. It was my signature, or at least it looked like it. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my temples. Someone had forged it. Someone close. Someone who knew exactly how I signed my name. When Dawson left the room, I sat there for what felt like hours. The clock ticked louder than my breathing. The walls seemed to close in. Somewhere down the hall, a man was shouting for a phone call. I thought of Linda. I thought of Ethan. And I thought of my brother Matt, how calm he'd looked standing by our father's side. By dawn, when they threw me into a holding cell, the rain had stopped. But the storm inside me had just begun. I saw them again the next morning. My family. The police had allowed me one brief visit before my arraignment. Linda's eyes were red, swollen from crying. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother sat in the corner, clutching her Bible so tightly the pages bent. "Dad, tell them," I begged. "You know I'd never steal from Grandpa." Howard's jaw clenched. "The evidence says otherwise," he muttered. "The evidence? You really think I stopped mid-sentence when I saw Matt standing behind them, his hand on Kate's shoulder. He met my eyes, calm, collected. "It's hard to believe, Andy," he said softly, with that same pitying tone he'd used all our lives. "But we'll let justice do its work." Justice. That word burned like acid, Linda whispered. "They froze our bank accounts. I can't even pay the mortgage." I reached for her, but the guard motioned for me to step back. "I'll fix this," I said. "I swear I'll fix this." But deep down, I knew something had already been broken beyond repair. When the visit ended, My father walked out first, shoulders stiff, as if the mere act of being in the same room as me stained him. My mother hesitated, tears spilling. "Pray, Andrew," she whispered. "Pray for forgiveness. For what?" I asked. But she was already gone. I sat back down on the cold metal bench, the echoes of their footsteps fading down the hall. In that silence, a truth settled over me. My family wasn't going to save me. They were the ones who'd already buried me, and for the first time, I felt the true weight of the word alone. Before all of this, before the police lights, before the trial, before my name became something people whispered, I had a life that felt small but whole. I owned a little repair shop off Route 19, Fletcher's Auto and Sons, though the Sons part was a dream that never came true. I'd open the shop at dawn, the smell of oil and rubber, mixing with the sweetness of Linda's coffee she packed in my thermos. It was an honest life. Calloused hands, long days, but peaceful nights. I loved the sound of engines, the rhythm, the logic of it. Machines didn't lie. You fixed what was broken and it worked again. People weren't like that. You couldn't tighten a bolt or change a part to make them right. Ethan would come by after school sometimes, sitting on the old tire stack while I worked. "Dad," he'd say, "you ever wish you were rich like Uncle Matt?" I'd laugh and shake my head. Rich doesn't mean happy, kiddo. But truth be told, even then I saw it, the difference. Matt lived up on the hill, in the house Grandpa built, with polished floors and the kind of silence that came from money. He ran the dealership with Dad, wore tailored suits, and drove new cars every month. I drove a beat-up Ford, and still called it lucky. Grandpa Walter used to visit me more than he visited any of them. He liked my shop, said the smell of grease and gasoline reminded him of when he started the business in his youth. He'd sit on a stool, cane resting by his knee, telling me how integrity mattered more than profit. "Never sell your soul for a paycheck, Andy," he'd say. "You can't buy it back later." Back then, I didn't know how those words would come to haunt me, because one day, everyone I loved sold theirs, and I was the price. Growing up, Matt and I were opposites. I was the quiet one, content with fixing lawnmowers or building birdhouses in the garage. Matt was the golden boy, loud, charming, the kind of kid who could talk his way out of anything. Dad adored him. When we were teenagers, Matt crashed his car after drinking at a party. Dad covered it up, said it was a lesson learned. When I dented a fender backing into a tree, I spent the weekend grounded, repainting it myself. That was how it always went. I remember one Christmas, Grandpa gave us both checks, $500 each. I used mine to buy new tools for the shop. Matt invested his in some opportunity that turned out to be a scam. When Grandpa found out, he shook his head but forgave him. "He'll learn," he said, but he never did. By the time we were adults, Matt had charm, money, and connections, and I had grease stains on my hands. Still, I believed blood mattered more than success. I believed that when things went wrong, families stood by you. I believed we were Fletchers, and that meant something. Then Grandpa got sick. Matt handled the estate meetings, Dad managed the business, and I kept the engines running at the shop. I thought that was enough, that loyalty was its own kind of inheritance. I didn't see how resentment was growing under all that politeness. Linda once told me, "You think too well of them, Andy. Not everyone loves the way you do." I told her she was wrong. I told her family doesn't betray its own. I'd spend the rest of my life regretting those words. The last summer before Grandpa died was the kind of season that feels endless. Fireflies, barbecue smoke, the hum of cicadas in the evening. Grandpa stayed mostly in his study, writing letters, updating papers, asking strange questions about forgiveness and legacy. One evening he called me in. "Andy," he said, "you ever think about what a name means?" I frowned. "A name?" "Fletcher," he said, staring at the old family portrait on the wall. "It's supposed to stand for hard work, honesty. I wonder if it still does." I didn't know then that he'd already changed his will, that he'd decided the legacy should go to the son who lived by those words, not just spoke them. A week later, I saw Matt in the driveway, yelling into his phone. When he noticed me, he smiled that thin, rehearsed smile. "Everything's fine, Andy," he said. "Don't worry about family business." But that night, Linda told me she'd overheard my mother crying in the kitchen, whispering, "He'll destroy us all if he finds out." I didn't know what she meant. I didn't ask. Because at that time I still believed the storm could be avoided. I still believed the people I loved would never turn that storm toward me. I was wrong. The day of Grandpa Walter's funeral smelled like rain and roses. The whole town showed up. Old customers from the dealership, neighbors, even the mayor. But all I could focus on was the sound of my father's voice, cold and clipped, giving a eulogy that felt rehearsed. He spoke of legacy and honor, but not once did he mention love. After the burial, we gathered in Grandpa's study, the same room where he used to let me sit on the old leather chair while he told stories about the Depression. Now it felt like a courtroom. The air was heavy with perfume and tension. Mr. Collins, Grandpa's attorney, unfolded the will with trembling hands. "Walter Fletcher's final testament," he began. My mother's fingers twisted a handkerchief in her lap. Matt sat with Kate beside him, their faces calm, expectant. Then Collins read the words that changed my life. "To my grandson, Andrew Fletcher, I leave the controlling share of Fletcher Motors and all associated real estate assets." The room froze. Even the ticking of the clock seemed to stop. Matt blinked as if he'd misheard. "That can't be right," he said. "It's right," Collins replied quietly. "There was an amendment filed last year." I looked at my parents. My father's face was pale, his jaw tight. My mother's lips parted, but no words came out. "Grandpa wanted it this way?" I asked. Collins nodded. "He said you were the only one who still worked with your hands, that you understood the meaning of the family name." Matt's chair scraped against the floor as he stood. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "Dad, say something." But Howard Fletcher said nothing. He just looked at me, and I saw it then. Not pride, not surprise, but something dark, envy. That was the moment my brother decided I'd taken what was his. And that's when he began planning how to take everything from me in return. After the reading, everything changed. I tried to act normal, still opened the shop, still showed up for Sunday dinners, but there was a new distance in every conversation. Dad stopped calling. Mom spoke in half sentences. Matt avoided me completely. When we did meet, he wore that polite smile, the one that hid a blade behind it. A week later, I found out he'd been going through the company's finances, the trust accounts, the dealership records, even Grandpa's old ledgers. "Just making sure everything's clean," he said when I asked. But there was something in his tone, something sharp. Linda noticed it too. "They're treating you like a thief," she said one night, folding laundry at the kitchen table. "It's like they're waiting for you to slip." "I haven't done anything wrong," I told her. "I know. But that's not the point, Andy. They're building a story." I laughed it off then. I shouldn't have. A few days later I went to the dealership. Matt was in the office with Dad, papers spread across the desk. They stopped talking the moment I entered. "Hey," I said, "I just wanted to check." "Not now," Dad cut me off. "We're busy." "Busy with what?" "Company matters," he said without looking up. I stood there for a long second, the silence stretching between us like a wire ready to snap. Then Matt looked up, smiling that thin smile again. "You'll get your turn, big brother." "Don't worry." I left, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something in that room had already sealed my fate. The first sign that something was wrong came 2 months later. I got a call from the bank. Something about a large withdrawal from one of the estate accounts. I didn't handle those, but the manager said, "Mr. Fletcher, your signature's on it." When I saw the copy, my stomach dropped. It looked like my handwriting, my name, everything. Except I'd never signed it. I drove straight to Matt's house that night. He answered the door in his robe, holding a glass of whiskey. "Andy," he said with mock surprise, "everything okay?" "Someone forged my name," I said. $50,000 from Grandpa's account. "You know anything about that?" His smile didn't falter. "You sure you didn't just forget?" "Don't play games with me, Matt." He stepped closer, his breath smelling of liquor. "Careful, brother. Accusing family isn't a good look, especially when the money trail points to you. I wanted to hit him. God, I wanted to, but I didn't. I just turned and walked back into the night, the air thick and heavy, the crickets silent. When I got home, Linda was waiting on the porch. She saw my face and said, "What did he do?" I couldn't answer, because deep down I already knew the truth. My brother was setting the stage. The paperwork, the whispers, the looks from neighbors, all of it was part of something bigger, and when the hammer finally fell, everyone would believe the story he built. Everyone. The first missing check came in July, then another, then a third. By September, the estate account was nearly empty, and my name was on every transaction. I didn't even know those checks existed until Detective Dawson knocked on my shop door, asking about irregularities. At first, I thought it was a joke. "Detective, I don't even handle that money," I said. He gave me a thin smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "Then how come your signature's on every withdrawal, Mr. Fletcher?" That was the beginning. Within a week, the whispers started. My father stopped coming by. My mother avoided my calls. When I drove through town, I saw people glance away, like guilt had a scent they could smell on me. One night I got a call from Linda. Her voice trembled. "Andy, someone broke into the shop." I raced home. The door had been forced open. My filing cabinet, the one where I kept every invoice, every receipt, every tax record, was empty. All gone. The air smelled like gasoline and rain. The police came. They looked around, wrote a report, and left. Nothing stolen but papers. 2 days later, those same documents, or what looked like them, showed up at the district attorney's office. Only this time, they had my name tied to every missing dollar from Grandpa's trust. Someone had built a perfect trail, one only I could follow straight into the grave. That night, Linda held my hand and whispered, "This isn't a mistake, is it?" I shook my head. "No, this is a message." From who, she didn't ask. She didn't have to, because deep down, we both knew whose fingerprints were on it, even if they'd never show up on paper. Matt played his role perfectly. Concerned brother, shocked citizen, public victim. He told anyone who'd listen that he couldn't believe I'd do something like that, but if I did, it was because Andy always had trouble managing money. The town believed him. He had the charm, the smile, the trust. Meanwhile, my father began cooperating with investigators. When I called him, he said, "This isn't personal, Andrew. The evidence is what it is." "Evidence?" I asked. "You mean what Matt gave them? You should have thought about the family name before doing whatever it is you did." And then he hung up. Linda begged me to hire a lawyer. I did. Janet McClure, a public defender who worked herself to exhaustion. She tried to believe me, but the case was airtight. Forged signatures, missing money. My bank account showing deposits I'd never seen, but all documented, all legal on paper. One night, she looked across her cluttered desk and said quietly, "Andy, whoever did this knew exactly how to bury you." And she was right. The day before my arrest, I drove up to Matt's house. The gate was closed. The porch lights glowed gold through the drizzle. I could see him inside, laughing with Kate, a fire in the fireplace. I just sat in my truck, watching him, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. I thought about knocking. I thought about screaming. But what was the point? The man who'd grown up beside me had already erased me. When I drove away, I caught one last glimpse of his silhouette in the window, smiling. He knew the police would be at my door the next night. They came for me while I was fixing a carburetor. I remember the hiss of the air compressor, the smell of oil, the faint hum of the radio. All of it cutting off the second I heard the words, "Andrew Fletcher, you're under arrest." I didn't resist. What would be the point? They took me through town in handcuffs. People watched from behind curtains. Some stepped out to stare. I saw Mrs. Henderson from the diner, her hand over her mouth. I saw the pastor look away. By the time they put me in the holding cell, my name was already ruined. That night, I called Linda. "Don't come," I told her. "Stay with Ethan." She cried. "What do I tell him?" "Tell him his father didn't steal anything. Tell him I love him." But the words felt hollow, because even I could hear how hopeless they sounded. Later, when the guards turned off the lights, I stared through the bars at the flickering hallway bulb. Somewhere in the distance, I heard another man sobbing into his blanket. The sound tore through me, and in that darkness, I made myself a promise. If I ever got out, if I ever proved the truth, I wouldn't just clear my name. I'd make them all face what they'd done. Every single one. I'd never been inside a courtroom before that day. The walls were polished oak, the air sharp with the scent of floor wax and nerves. I sat at the defense table, wrists aching from the cuffs, staring at the people who used to be my family. Linda was there holding Ethan's hand. He was 12, his face pale and scared. My mother sat beside my father, her Bible clutched to her chest. And behind them, in the second row, Matt and Kate sat like royalty, whispering behind their folded hands. When the bailiff said, "All rise," I stood. My knees almost gave out. Judge Merritt entered. Calm, tired eyes, the kind of man who'd long stopped believing in innocence. The prosecution started strong. Robert Stein, the district attorney, walked in like he was performing theater. He showed forged bank records, falsified withdrawals, even photos of me entering the estate office, photos I hadn't known existed. "This is a case of betrayal," Stein said, his voice rich and steady. "A man who took advantage of family trust for personal gain." I looked at the jury, 12 strangers. Some avoided my eyes. Others looked at me like I was already guilty. Janet, my lawyer, did what she could. She pointed out inconsistencies, missing documents, the lack of direct evidence. But the truth was buried under years of lies. When they called Matt to the stand, I could barely breathe. He played the part perfectly. "Worried brother?" Reluctant witness. His voice trembled as he said, "I wish I didn't have to be here, but I just want to know why Andy did it." I almost stood up right then. I wanted to shout, to tell them all how he'd forged those signatures, how he'd smiled when I was arrested. But one look from Janet told me to stay seated. When Matt stepped down, he glanced at me, not with guilt, but with quiet satisfaction. The kind of look that said, "I've already won." The trial lasted 12 days. 12 days that felt like 12 years. Every morning I'd wake in the county jail, shave under flickering lights, and tell myself to hold on. Janet visited when she could. "We'll appeal," she'd say. "We'll find the flaw." But by day 8, even she looked defeated. Stein brought in handwriting experts, accountants, even a so-called friend who claimed I'd once mentioned needing cash. Lies stacked on lies, each one heavier than the last. The worst moment came when Linda testified. She didn't want to. Her hands shook so hard, the microphone picked up the sound. "Did your husband ever mention his grandfather's accounts?" Stein asked. She hesitated. He said he wasn't involved, but he knew about them, correct?" "Yes." Stein smiled like a man closing a coffin. No further questions. When she left the stand, she wouldn't look at me. On the final day, the courtroom felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. The jury filed in, eyes blank. "On the charge of embezzlement," the foreman said, "we find the defendant guilty." The sound was dull, almost gentle, like a door closing softly. Linda gasped. My mother sobbed quietly. My father just stared ahead, face like stone. I remember the judge's words, but not their meaning. 10 years to life, with possibility of parole. I turned to see Ethan crying into his mother's sleeve. I tried to smile, to let him know it would be okay. But the truth was, it wouldn't, because in that moment, everything I loved was already gone. They allowed me 5 minutes with Linda before the transport van arrived. We sat in a small room with a glass divider, the phone cold in my hand. "Andy," she whispered, "please tell me it's not true." "It's not," I said. "You know me?" I thought I did. Her eyes filled with tears. "Why didn't you fight harder? Why didn't you—" She stopped, pressing her lips together. "Ethan's confused. He thinks you stole from your own family." I wanted to scream, to pound the glass, to make her see, but all I could say was, "Tell him his dad didn't give up." When the guard knocked on the door, she placed her hand on the glass. "I don't know if I can do this," she said. "I know," I whispered. "But please, don't let him hate me." The guard opened the door. I stood, but she didn't move. She just sat there, tears running down her face, her wedding ring catching the light. As they led me away, I turned for one last look. She was still there, staring at the empty chair where I'd been. When the van door shut behind me, the world outside disappeared. No air, no sound. Just the hum of the engine and the rattle of chains. That's when I realized prison wasn't the punishment. It was the aftermath. The real sentence had already begun. They said state prison would make a man out of me. What it really did was strip away everything that made me human. The first thing that hit me was the smell, a mix of bleach, sweat, and rot. The second was the noise, steel doors slamming, boots echoing on concrete, men shouting, laughing, crying. A symphony of broken souls. They shaved my head, gave me a jumpsuit with Fletcher A stamped across the chest and led me through the corridor. I remember the guard's voice, "Keep your eyes forward. Don't talk. Don't stop." When the cell door closed behind me, the clang echoed through my chest. My cellmate looked up from his bunk, tall, scarred, dark-skinned, eyes tired but alert. "Name's Jerome," he said, voice deep and calm. "But everyone calls me JJ," I nodded. "Andy," he studied me for a moment. "You ain't built for this place, Andy." He was right. I wasn't. That night, I lay on the thin mattress, staring at the cracked ceiling. Somewhere down the block, someone screamed. Someone else laughed. A radio played faint country music, fading in and out. Sleep didn't come easy. Every sound felt like a threat. Every breath carried fear. I thought about Linda, about Ethan, about the life I'd lost. And for a moment, I wondered if death might have been easier than this. But then JJ said softly, "Don't let them see you break, man. You break once, they'll never stop." So I didn't. I stayed still, silent, and somewhere between exhaustion and despair, I realized this wasn't temporary. This was my new life. JJ taught me the rules. Not the ones printed in the inmate handbook, the real ones. Rule 1, never owe anyone. Not cigarettes, not favors, not even respect. Everything here costs more than it's worth. Rule 2, don't talk about your case. Everyone's innocent and everyone's listening. Rule 3, fight only when you must, but if you do, win. I kept to myself. Fixed broken radios, repaired fans for guards, anything to stay useful. The work reminded me of my shop. Same rhythm, same smell of metal and oil. Except now, I wasn't fixing cars. I was fixing time. Days bled into weeks. I learned the sounds, the breakfast bell at dawn, the distant buzz of electric gates, the sharp crack of a baton hitting someone's ribs. One afternoon, JJ caught me staring at the yard fence. "Don't," he said. "Don't what?" "Don't look too long. It gets inside your head. Makes you forget you're still alive." He was right again. At night, I'd lie awake listening to him hum old blues songs. "You ever get out," he told me once, "you remember these walls. Not so you hate 'em, but so you don't waste what's left." I didn't answer. I didn't know if I'd ever get out. But I knew one thing. I wouldn't let this place erase me. 3 months in, I got my first taste of real violence. A man named Victor V. Larson, big, tattooed eyes dead, decided I owed him cigarettes. I told him no. The next morning, he cornered me in the laundry room. "You think you're better than the rest of us, pretty boy?" He sneered. Before I could answer, his fist hit my jaw. Then another. I hit the floor, blood filling my mouth. Then I heard JJ's voice. "Back off, V." V turned. "What, you his babysitter?" Something like that. It happened fast. A blur of fists, shouting, guards rushing in. By the time it ended, JJ was bleeding from his lip, V was on the ground, and I was standing there, shaking. The guards threw us both in solitary. 10 days in a box the size of a closet. No window, no sound but your own heartbeat. In that darkness, I learned what loneliness really meant. The first few days, I replayed everything. The trial, the look on Linda's face, Matt's smirk. I started talking to the walls, just to hear a voice. On the 7th day, a guard slid a tray of food through the slot. "You're the one who says he's innocent, right?" he asked. "Yeah," I muttered. He laughed. "So's everyone else." The light flicked off again. I sat there, back against the concrete, and whispered to myself, "They can take my name, my home, my years, but not my truth." The words sounded small in that cell, but they kept me alive. The first year inside, I wrote a letter to Ethan every week. I told him about the yard, about JJ, about the machines I fixed in the prison workshop. I didn't mention the fear or the fights or the loneliness. I didn't tell him how nights smelled like sweat and disinfectant, and how I could hear men sobbing through the vents. At first, he wrote back, short notes in shaky handwriting. "Miss you, Dad. Mom says you'll be home soon." Those letters were the only light I had. I kept them folded inside my Bible, rereading them until the paper softened at the edges. But then, after Linda filed for divorce, the letters stopped. 1 month, 2, a year. Nothing. I tried writing again, dozens of letters. None came back. I even sent one through my mother, asking her to pass it along. No answer. The silence was worse than any sentence. JJ saw me staring at the mail cart one morning and said, "You gotta stop expecting ghosts to write back." "He's not a ghost," I said. "He's my boy. Then let him come when he's ready. You can't drag love through the bars." He was right. But it didn't stop the ache. At night, I'd imagine Ethan growing taller, learning to shave, graduating, all without me. Each year that passed felt like watching him fade, piece by piece, until I wasn't sure if I remembered his voice or if I'd made it up. The hardest part wasn't losing freedom. It was losing the sound of my son saying, "Dad, time is a strange thing in prison. You don't feel it moving, but one day you look up and 10 years are gone." I missed everything. Birthdays, Christmases, funerals. When my mother died, I didn't even find out until 3 months later. The chaplain called me into his office, his voice soft. "Your mother passed," he said. "Heart failure." I stared at him. "Did she leave anything?" He nodded and handed me a Bible, the same one she used to carry. Inside, tucked between the pages of Psalms, was a note written in her shaky hand. "Pray for forgiveness, my son. The truth always finds its way home." I didn't understand it then, but those words would come back years later. I wasn't allowed to attend her funeral. I sat on my bunk while the others played cards and smoked. JGA handed me a small wooden cross he'd carved from scrap. "She'd want you to hold something," he said. The next year, I got word that my father had sold the dealership, retired, never came to see me. Not once. Matt and Kate had 2 children by then. I heard about them through gossip that floated into the prison. Their perfect house, their charity events, their shiny photographs in the local paper, and there I was, inmate at 45109, fixing a broken fan while my brother lived the life that was stolen from me. Every night, I'd lie awake thinking, "He's free because I'm here," and that thought burned hotter than any hatred I'd ever known. By the 15th year, I barely recognized myself. My hair had gone gray. My hands trembled from old injuries. The mirror in my cell reflected a man I didn't know, hollow-eyed, quiet, slower in every way. JJ and I had become brothers in all but blood. We spent long hours in the yard talking about what we'd do if we ever got out. "Me," he'd say, "I'm going to find a cabin somewhere. No noise, no walls. And me," I'd say, "I don't even know if I have anywhere to go." He'd nod, his gaze far away. "Then build something new. Even ashes can grow flowers if you let them." One winter morning, a guard came to my cell. "Carter's gone," he said, "gone. Heart attack. Happened in his sleep. They buried JJ in a small prison cemetery behind the north fence. No family, no visitors, no ceremony. I watched from a distance through the razor wire, the snow falling in slow silence. That night, I sat on my bunk holding the wooden cross he'd given me. For the first time in years, I cried. Not loud, just quiet, steady tears that tasted like salt and rust. By then, I had nothing left. No wife, no son, no parents, no friends, only time. Endless, devouring time. And still, somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "Don't die here." "Andy, not before the truth does its work." It was a Tuesday, same as every other Tuesday for the past 24 years, when the warden secretary called my name over the intercom. "Fletcher, visitor." I almost didn't go. After 2 decades, visitors were rare. But something in her tone made me curious. In the visiting room, she stood out immediately. Young, sharp eyes, hair pulled back, notebook in hand. "Mr. Fletcher?" she asked. "Who's asking?" "Nina Wallace. The Pennsylvania Ledger. I'm investigating wrongful convictions." I came across your case, I almost laughed. You and 100 others, lady. They all forget by the time they leave this room. She didn't flinch. Maybe, but I found something. That stopped me. She opened her folder and slid a photocopy across the table. An old yellow document. This was filed under an unrelated estate case. It's a bank reconciliation record from your grandfather's trust. It shows a withdrawal, same date as the one you were accused of making, but signed by Matthew Fletcher. My chest tightened. You're saying, I'm saying whoever built your case either missed this file or buried it. I stared at the paper. 24 years. 24 years stolen, and the proof had been sitting in a basement, collecting dust. Nina leaned forward. I can't promise anything, but if this checks out, it could reopen your case. I swallowed hard. Why me? She smiled, small and tired. Because someone should have cared back then. And because I think you still do. When she left, I sat alone, the paper trembling in my hands. For the first time in decades, something inside me stirred, not hope exactly, but the memory of it. 2 weeks later, Nina came back with more. Old statements, handwriting comparisons. Bank microfilms no one had bothered to review. This, she said, spreading the pages across the table, isn't sloppy work. It's a cover-up. She'd found that my brother had quietly transferred company funds into a shadow account months before my arrest, using my forged signature as a mask. When Grandpa's death made the will public, Matt moved fast to erase the evidence. But one thing slipped through. One forgotten document. Why now? I asked. Why dig this up after all this time? Nina hesitated. Because your brother's company is being audited. He's losing investors, and people are starting to talk. I almost smiled. Time had finally done what I couldn't. She looked at me, eyes soft. Do you want to fight this, Andy? I thought about it for a long moment. I don't know if I have the strength, she leaned in. Then let me fight for you. That night, back in my cell, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The sounds of the prison felt different, distant, dull, like they belonged to another world. I whispered JJ's old words into the dark. Even ashes can grow flowers. Maybe this was the first bloom. Over the next few months, Nina worked relentlessly. She petitioned the Innocence Network, filed motions, tracked down retired employees, even found Judge Merritt, old, frail, and living in a nursing home. When she visited him, she recorded their conversation. He admitted what I'd suspected all along. The evidence was troubling, he said. But the family influence was strong. Your brother, your father, they had friends in high places. That confession became the crack in the wall. The state reopened my case. I remember the day the guards came for me again. Same corridor, same steel doors. But this time I wasn't being dragged to a cell. I was being led to a hearing. I sat in a small courtroom, my chains rattling as Nina stood beside me, calm and fierce. Across the aisle sat a state attorney representing the interests of justice. The judge read through the findings, then looked up. After review of the newly discovered evidence, the conviction of Andrew Fletcher is vacated. The words hit me like a storm. For a second I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. Then Nina placed her hand over mine. You're going home, she whispered. But as the doors opened and sunlight spilled through for the first time in 24 years, I realized something chilling. I had nowhere to go. The world outside wasn't mine anymore. Freedom had a weight I wasn't sure I could carry. The sun felt foreign on my skin when I stepped outside the prison gates. 24 years. That's how long it had been since I'd felt wind that wasn't filtered through steel bars. Nina drove me to a motel just off Highway 22. The radio played softly, something about a world I didn't recognize. Gas prices, cell phones, presidents I'd never heard of. The world had moved on. I hadn't. When we parked, she handed me an envelope. A start, she said. Inside were a few $100s from a fundraiser she'd organized online. People want to help. I stared at the bills. People? She smiled. Turns out innocence sells better than guilt. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. That night I lay on the motel bed, staring at the ceiling fan. The hum reminded me of my cell. The air smelled like stale detergent and dust. Freedom didn't feel like I'd imagined. It wasn't bright. It was grey. The next morning, Nina knocked on my door. "You ready?" she asked. "For what?" "To clear your name publicly," I sighed. "Isn't that what the court did?" "No," she said, her tone sharp but kind. "The court erased the conviction. They didn't erase the story people believe." She was right. Out there, in the world that had forgotten me, I was still the man who stole from his dying grandfather. Still the whisper in church pews and diners, and if I didn't fight back, that lie would live longer than I would. Nina arranged interviews, press conferences, legal statements, all the things I didn't understand and barely wanted. But she insisted, "The truth needs a face, Andy, yours." So I sat under harsh studio lights, cameras blinking red, microphones shoved in my face. They asked the same questions over and over. "Do you forgive your brother? What's the first thing you'll do as a free man? Do you blame the justice system?" I wanted to tell them about the smell of the prison showers, the screams at night, the birthdays I'd missed, the years I'd buried alive. But all I said was, "I just want the truth to mean something again." After one broadcast, Nina showed me the comments flooding in online. Half sympathy, half doubt. "Looks guilty to me. Probably cut a deal. They always claim innocence after the fact. It stung." Words from strangers can wound deeper than a sentence from a judge. But then, one evening, my old pastor sent a message. "We're glad you're home. Andy, some of us never stopped praying for you. I read it a dozen times." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Nina kept pushing, her energy unbreakable. "We'll sue for damages," she said. "We'll expose every name that buried that file." I shook my head. "You really think money fixes 24 years? "No," she said softly. "But it forces the world to look at what they did. And maybe that was enough. The hardest part of freedom wasn't the world. It was facing the people still in it." Matt lived just outside Pittsburgh, in a glass and brick mansion built with my inheritance. Nina found his address, but I didn't need it. I remembered every turn of that road. I didn't plan a speech. I didn't want revenge. I just needed to see his face when he looked at me, not the ghost of his lies, but the man he'd buried. When I rang the bell, it was Kate who opened the door. She froze. "Andrew, where's your husband?" "Matt's not well," she said quickly. "He's been under stress," I heard a voice behind her. "Let him in, Kate." Matt appeared, older, heavier, the glow gone from his eyes. He walked with a limp. I wondered if guilt could make a man's body decay. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "So, you're out?" "I am." "I didn't mean for it to go that far. 24 years isn't too far, Matt. It's a lifetime." He looked down, rubbing his temple. "Dad made me do it. He said the business couldn't survive with you in charge." My chest tightened. "You could have told the truth." "I was going to. But then the money." He stopped. His voice cracked. "I can't take it back." "No," I said. "But you can face it." He didn't answer. When I left, the wind was cold and sharp. I looked back once. Matt standing in the doorway, shoulders slumped, like a man waiting for a verdict that would never come. Driving away, I didn't feel victory. I didn't feel peace. Just an empty space where anger used to live. The morning they let me go, the sky was pale grey, the kind that blurs the horizon into nothing. The guard who'd handed me my uniform on my first day was the same one who opened the gate now. He didn't meet my eyes. "You're clear," he said, just like that. 2 words for 2.5 decades. They gave me a cardboard box, 1 Bible, 2 photos, a worn-out letter from Ethan that had faded almost white, and JJ's wooden cross. My whole life fit into that box. When I stepped outside, the wind hit my face. It was cold, almost metallic. I didn't breathe for a moment, afraid that if I did, the world would vanish. Nina was waiting by her car. "You ready?" she asked. I looked back at the gates. The concrete walls rose like cliffs, the razor wire glinting in the morning light. For years, I dreamed of seeing them from the outside. Now that I did, all I felt was emptiness. "Yeah," I said finally. "I guess I am." As we drove away, the prison shrank in the rearview mirror until it disappeared completely. But it didn't feel gone. It stayed inside me. The noise, the smell, the weight of silence. Freedom wasn't loud. It was quiet. Too quiet. That night in the motel, I woke up 3 times to the sound of my own heartbeat, thinking it was the guard's footsteps. It would take months before I stopped flinching at the slam of a door. A week after my release, I went back to my old house. It was still there, smaller, grayer, the paint peeling, the porch sagging. Someone else lived there now? A young couple. The woman answered the door, holding a baby. "Can I help you?" she asked. I forced a smile. "I used to live here." She tilted her head. "Oh, you're the Fletcher man, the Fletcher man." Not Andrew, not Andy. Just a rumor turned ghost. I thanked her and walked away. The yard looked smaller. The tree I'd planted for Ethan was gone. Got down. I sat on the curb across the street, watching the house until the lights inside flickered off. For a moment, I imagined Linda standing in that doorway, calling me in for dinner. I imagined Ethan's laughter echoing through the yard, but memories lie. They replay without mercy, then vanish before you can hold them. When I finally stood up, my knees cracked, my chest tight. I realized then I didn't belong anywhere. The town had moved on. The people had turned the page. I was still stuck in the chapter no one wanted to read. Freedom had rules of its own. You had to learn to swipe cards, use phones that spoke back, answer questions with patience when people recognized your name from the news. I found work at a small garage outside Harrisburg. The owner, a kind old man named Fred, hired me after reading my story. "Everyone deserves a second engine," he joked, "and maybe a second chance." The first paycheck I held in my hands felt unreal, paper proof that I was a man again. But even as I worked, something inside me stayed still. I'd watch people laughing at the diner next door, watch fathers teaching their kids how to drive, and I'd feel outside, like I'd died years ago and the world had forgotten to bury me. One afternoon I got a letter, no return address. Inside was a photo. Ethan, older now, maybe in his 30s, standing beside a woman and a little girl. On the back, written in neat handwriting, were 3 words, "I know now." I sat there for a long time, holding the photo, my vision blurring. He knew. He finally knew I didn't cry. Not that day, but that night, when the lights were off and the garage was silent, I whispered into the dark, "That's enough." Not forgiveness, not closure, just truth, the only thing that had ever belonged to me. It came in the mail, folded neatly inside a cream-colored envelope. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. Eleanor Fletcher. For a long time I just stared at it. My mother had been gone for years, but somehow her name still found its way to me. I opened it carefully. Inside was a note from my father's nurse, a woman named Claire. "Your father isn't well. He wants to see you before it's too late." Below, an address, a care facility in Pittsburgh. I sat at my kitchen table for an hour, turning that paper over and over. My father, the man who hadn't visited once during my 24 years behind bars. The man who'd chosen silence over truth. Part of me wanted to tear the letter up. But another part, the part that still longed for something I couldn't name, said go. When I told Nina, she said softly, "You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said. "But maybe I owe it to myself." The drive took 3 hours. I barely noticed the road. My hands were cold on the wheel, the same way they'd been the night I was arrested. When I arrived, the air smelled of antiseptic and wilted flowers. A nurse led me to room 108, and there he was, Howard Fletcher, older, smaller, his eyes sunken but sharp as ever. "Andrew," he rasped. "You came." I almost didn't. He nodded slowly. "I wouldn't have blamed you." There was a long silence, the kind that fills rooms with ghosts. Finally he said, "I failed you." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he'd ever come. 2 days later, I was invited to what they called a family dinner. Matt would be there, Kate, even Ethan, who, I was told, had agreed to come for closure. I nearly said no, but something in me needed to face them all, not to forgive, not to make peace, but to stop running from the faces that had haunted my dreams. The dinner was held at Matt's house, the same glass and brick place where he'd built his kingdom on lies. The smell of roasted meat filled the air, but it didn't make me hungry, just sick. When I walked in, the conversation stopped. Kate looked at me like she was seeing a ghost. "Andrew," she said faintly. Matt stood by the window, thinner now, grey at the temples. He looked like a man hollowed out by his own secrets. Ethan was at the table, beside a woman I didn't know. His eyes met mine, hesitant, uncertain. "Dad," he said quietly. My throat tightened. "Hey, kid, he was 36 now. A father himself." But saying son felt too fragile, too sacred. We sat. The air was heavy with things unsaid. Matt cleared his throat. "I want to start by saying, I'm sorry." The words hung there, small and useless. "I don't need your apology," I said. "I needed your truth 24 years ago." He nodded, eyes wet. "I know, and I'll carry that until I die." "You already are," I said softly. No one spoke for a while. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator. Then Ethan reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. "I believe you, Dad," he said. "I know what they did." And for the first time in decades, I felt something crack open inside me. Not healing, not joy, but the faintest sense of release. After dinner, we stood in the backyard. The air was cool, the trees bare. Matt came out quietly, standing a few feet away. "You ever think about what it cost you?" he asked. "Every day," I said. "And what about you?" He looked down. "More than you think. My kids won't talk to me. The company's gone. Dad won't speak my name. It's all ashes now." "Then we're both ghosts," I said. He nodded, tears in his eyes. "You still hate me?" I thought about it. About the nights in solitary, about my mother's funeral, about JJ's grave behind the fence. "I did," I said. "But hate's heavy. I've carried it long enough." He wiped his face, but it didn't change the emptiness in his eyes. "I don't deserve forgiveness." I didn't say you had it. We stood there for a long moment. Two broken men watching the darkness swallow the yard. When I finally turned to leave, Ethan was waiting by the car. He looked at me, really looked, and said, "You want to meet your granddaughter?" The word hit me like a prayer. "Yes," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Then come by tomorrow." As I drove away, the city lights blurred through the windshield. For the first time since my release, I didn't feel completely alone. But even then, I knew love couldn't undo time. It could only stand beside it, and time, once taken, never gives itself back. The next morning, I drove to Ethan's house, a small, warm home tucked on a quiet street lined with maples, the kind of house where laughter lives. I sat in the car for a while, hands trembling on the wheel. He opened the door before I could knock. "Come in, Dad," he said softly. Inside smelled like coffee and cinnamon. A woman, his wife, Anna, smiled politely. And then, from behind her legs, a little girl peeked out. Blonde hair, blue eyes. The same eyes I used to see in the mirror before prison took the light out of them. "This is Claire," Ethan said. "Your granddaughter." I crouched down slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast, she'd vanish. "Hi there," I said. She studied me for a moment, then whispered, "Grandpa." That word broke something in me. 24 years of stone just cracked. I nodded. "Yes, sweetheart, Grandpa." She ran forward and wrapped her tiny arms around my neck. Her hair smelled like soap in summer. For a moment, the world was quiet. No prison, no lies. Just a heartbeat against mine. When I looked up, Ethan was watching me. Tears stood in his eyes, but his smile was steady. "I used to hate you," he said quietly. "But I was wrong. I'm sorry." I stood and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't owe me an apology, son. You were just a boy. You believed what everyone told you." He nodded. "Still, I want her to know who you really are." I looked at Claire, who was humming to herself, tracing her finger across the table. "Then start with the truth," I said. "All of it, because truth, even when it hurts, is the only inheritance worth passing down." A month later, I got a call from the nursing home. My father was gone. I went, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to close the circle. The nurse handed me a small envelope she said he'd left for me. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. "Andrew, you were right. I knew it before the trial ended, but pride's a hard disease to cure. I let Matt do it, because I thought it would protect the family name. I see now you were the only one who ever carried it with honor. Dad, I stood there for a long time, the paper trembling in my hands. Would you like to see him before we take him? The nurse asked. I shook my head. I've already said goodbye. When I walked outside, the sky was gray again, same color as the day they'd taken me away. But this time, it didn't feel heavy, it just was. I drove to the old Fletcher dealership. It was boarded up now, windows broken, the sign rusted. I parked and walked through the weeds until I stood in front of the door where my name used to hang. For years, that name had been a curse. Now it was just a word. Fletcher, I said aloud. You can rest now. The wind answered, carrying the scent of oil and rain, and for the first time in my life, I felt the faintest trace of peace. It's been 3 years since my release. I work part-time at Fred's garage, fixing engines and teaching local kids how to rebuild what's broken. Most of them don't know my story, and I like it that way. Some nights, I sit on my porch with Claire on my lap, pointing at the stars. She asks about the scar on my wrist, about the cross I wear around my neck. I tell her they're reminders that even when you lose everything, you can still choose not to hate. Ethan visits often. Sometimes we talk about Matt, who passed last year, heart attack. I went to the funeral. No one expected me to. I didn't go to forgive him. I went because, in the end, he was still my brother. When people ask what freedom feels like, I tell them it's complicated. It's the smell of rain after steel. It's walking through a crowd and realizing no one knows your story. It's breathing air that tastes of both victory and regret. Some wounds never heal. They just learn to live quietly under the skin. I don't pray for revenge anymore. I pray for time, not to reclaim what I lost, but to use what's left. And when I close the garage at night, when the air is still and the town sleeps, I sometimes hear JJ's voice in the hum of the engines. Even ashes can grow flowers, Andy. He was right. They can, but the flowers never bloom without remembering the fire. If you like this story, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left.